but we had to just make sure that we create room for the president to address us and to know what lay ahead for the year and hear his thoughts and how he's thinking, how he plans to deal with the societal issues, but also our economic issues and any other issues that are there, really. But the biggest one is obviously the pandemic. So we are back tonight for the episode we postponed last week. We will be covering Indaba ye Lobolo or Lobola, or some call it in other religions or cultures, dowry, the principle behind it. But yeah, we have a guest, an old friend, Dr. Baba Buntu, joining us tonight. So welcome to the show, sir, and we look forward to your thoughts and insights on this matter. Obviously, we want your engagement, so please comment, questions. We want to hear what you think. You want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear that you're here. So please drop us comments in the comment section. Over to you, okay, guys. You're honorable.
Yeah. Good evening, friends, and welcome to this episode. I think this year we've already said that we're studying on different notes, and we already had, I think, the last time we were live, where we brought in Mrs. Vuba on a surprise appearance, and that was a beautiful thing to witness.
So, I should ask you, are there any surprises tonight?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Tonight I'm behaved. Doc, welcome to Conversations with Friends. So officially, you are part of the fold. You're a friend.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I think without any wasting of time, I think it's pertinent for us to kind of get into this topic because I believe, in my view, that we've kind of lost the understanding of what Ilobolo is about and what Ilobolo is meant to be and is meant for. So many people these days are calling for the abolishment of Ilobolo. Other families are treating Ilobolo differently to others, even within the same ethnic group. And there's a misconception that when somebody pays Ilobolo, they're actually buying another person. So we'd like your thoughts, your views on and to help us demystify what this whole thing is about. And maybe if you also have the context of the history of it and your views. So it's up to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you, and thank you to all the listeners and viewers. It's a great honor for me to be part of Conversations with Friends. I've been peeping your activities from the sideline, and I'm very happy with the fact that you are bringing conversations that are not always easy into the many homes and the minds of our people. We need to talk, but we need to talk with purpose. Sometimes we are called a people that talk forever and don't do. But I think talking is also part of action. So there's different forms of conversations, and this is definitely one that is geared towards action. So maybe, I don't know if you are going to guide this by question or you want me to just jump in to say some statements around my views, or
just get into it.
Yeah, get into it. But okay. What we've learned from previous guests and listeners, it's always good to just set the foundation. Yeah. Or just so that, So perhaps just starting with, this Lobolo or Lobola in this setting. Yeah. I think just so that we don't lose some people.
Sure.
Because the debate can get heated. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So I am director together with my wife and one of our spiritual sons of a company called Ebo Kusini Solutions based in Johannesburg. And our main aim is really to engage African people in cultural literacy and understanding our cultures and maybe I'll start there. I think we are discussing a custom that is it sits very deeply in African culture, but it's also greatly misunderstood. And as somebody who has been on several delegations in the negotiation for Ilobolo, I've seen with my own eyes how oppressive and how far removed from at least how I see the custom and its intention, how far removed we have come in many instances. And it's with that experience, I can't also say that I'm just upset when especially younger Africans feel that, but this is nonsense. We don't have to do this. Like, let's just move in together. Come on, why are we doing this nonsense? So I do understand why some people feel this is meaningless, that it has become to some extent oppressive in its practice. But I believe that that's not how it was intended, and that's not how it was practiced in the beginning. So for me, if I should define or explain what my understanding of Ilobolo is, I don't see it as dowry, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But if I should use an English word, I would maybe use bride wealth, but even that is not really fully explaining it. It's a pact between two families or clans. And I think maybe before we understand Ilobolo, we need to understand what marriage means in the African culture. And in African culture, marriage is not a union between just a man and a woman. It's families and clans coming together. And because African life is supposed to be, I'm saying supposed to be because I think we all know that we are not always practicing African culture the way it was, especially before colonization and the disruption that happened with foreigners taking over many of our customs, forcing us to practice religions that also made us look down on certain customs and cultural attributes. So since African culture is supposed to be very communal, it also means that and marriage is seen as an institution in society. It's not a private affair. It's not just something that you do, the two of you. It is something that the family, the close family, but also the broader family and even the community has to be part of. They have to know who you're going to get married to. They need to know what family you are going to, which families are now going to be joined. And the understanding of that is that if the families don't know each other, there's going to be conflicts, there's going to be clashes, there's going to be disruptions, there's going to be all kinds of things that don't help to govern and protect the marriage. And those of us who are married, I think we can all confess that marriage is not easy. I mean, it takes a lot of work to keep it together, to manage it, to make sure it's strong. And if you leave just two people to work on that marriage, it can be quite a lonely space. So the ideal is that this should be a space that is governed by, protected by, and infused with love and care and all kinds of protective measures from the family. And remember also, when we talk about the collective in an African understanding, it also involves ancestors, so those who have parted, and even future children. So it's a huge concept to get married. So it's seen as very disrespectful if you then just run off with your partner and you create a ceremony for yourself and you now come back and say we are married. It's seen as if you don't regard life as important. It's seen as you are breaking the lineage and the whole the system of kinship. So the act then, or the process, I would say the process of Ilobolo is a process where gifts and a certain portion, and remember back in the day this would be counted in cows, and cows were significant because they articulated the wealth of a family, they articulated life, they articulated livestock, meaning that they would be, through livestock you would also be able to plan for the season to come, knowing that you had food, knowing that you could take care of a family. So there's a symbolism in Ilobolo where and I think this is another thing that I'm a bit alarmed by, that today there are many young men who say that I don't think I can get married because I don't have money. And we know that Ilobolo has become money. But originally it wasn't even the man's or the groom's responsibilities, was the family of the man who would come together, and they wouldn't start just when they hear that there's an announcement of a marriage. This would be something that is planned from the day that a son is born, that this is something that we need to do when the son is getting ready to get married. So there would be a transfer of wealth. in the form of cows. And the significance of this would be the sealing of the sanctity of the marriage, to signify that the man's family acknowledges that this man has been groomed into understanding what it means to be a husband, will do his utmost to respect, to create a homestead that is safe, and to honor his wife. And that's quite different to the language that we sometimes hear, which sounds like owning and capturing and having bought a wife. So let me just start by that.
Yeah. But while you're there, when you spoke about the fact that Ilobolo was never meant for me as the son in the family to be paying or to be contributing or to be bringing that in, I then remember expressions like umakotuwe too, where your family or your father would then say, or my father would actually say umakotwami, because he's the one okhiphe inkomo wayongilobolela umakoti. But in a sense, I would have chosen her. But then the family would have participated in the practice of ilobolo.
True. No, you're giving a very important context to the communal understanding of marriage and family, and the choices you also make, how they impact on other family members, how they must be in accordance with certain values that are practiced within families. But I think it's very clear to us that when we discuss practices like this, if somebody has ill intentions or want to infuse their own egotistical values, obviously it very soon becomes oppressive and quite awkward. And I think that's what I wanted to trace a bit about. How has it come a custom that we have a problem with? And I think we need to go back to both religious history, but also the history of, especially in the southern part of Africa, of colonial law. So colonialists, when they found this practice, they found it to be in complete opposition to what they believed in and what they thought was right. And they then infused or enforced certain laws where this was seen as a business transaction. And that's where even the word dowry comes from, because let's also remember that forms of gifts and payments from the bridal family to the groom's family and vice versa is actually very prevalent around the world since ancient times. And in European culture, and to some extent in some Asian cultures as well, it has been kind of seen as a payment. It has kind of aligned itself with the idea of patriarchy. So basically the idea in some practices, I'm not saying all, in some practices outside of the continent in ancient times, it meant that if you had paid X and Y, this woman actually belonged to you. And she had very little rights to claim that you were oppressing her, or that you were not listening to her, and that you were maybe even physically harassing her. So when you maybe look at African customs with that eyes and think that that's what you're looking at, and I think this is what colonialists were doing. So they then instrumented certain laws. For instance, you may be aware that in Zulu culture, there's this notion of 11 cows. That's like the full bride price must be 11 cows. And that's something that the colonial law were kind of enforcing into customary law. And the idea behind that was that Africans don't know how to negotiate. It's going to get dramatic. It's going to get oppressive. So they need a guideline, and that was kind of implemented. So it's an example of, if you don't know that history, you will maybe just take it as culture. It's something that your grandfather told you, but you may not know how it actually became that particular price.
Wow, there is a lot to take. Lutando, your thoughts?
No, interesting. I think this is what I often say, this, that not just with Ilobolo, with a lot of our cultural practices, there's just an under documentation to non-documentation of historically where it comes from, the principles behind it. I think in my own process of Ilobolo, there were a lot of things that were unearthed, particular to Ilobolo, particular to Xhosa culture, which were unearthed just because there were questions, right? With it, I was asking it, or my wife was asking, it's like, what does this mean? You're wrapping this around me. What does this mean? And in some families or unions, there wouldn't even be answers for those questions for a number of reasons. But my mom has always been a student of understanding what she does, and I think through that has always had some answers, not all answers for me. But I think that triggered a curiosity in me to be like, well, if I'm doing anything, you know, I want to understand what is the symbolism behind it, what is the thinking behind it. And even in Ilobolo, I was very clear that I'm adhering to this out of honor for my parents, because for me, I think Zibuza would know I'm very strong on principles. So for me, the principle of honoring my parents has always been the basic fundamental that I owe them, right? Anything beyond that is extra. So me going on to be successful, whether it's a career or business or whatever, and marrying and having all of that is an extra. Because I always used to joke with my mom and say, I didn't sign an application form to be coming to this world, right? You know. So for me, the best gratitude has been to honor them. So sometimes it is to do things that you may not be agreeing or fully understanding, but I'll do it, right? So for me, there was that relationship with like that. So going to the mountain, a lot of things, because you just didn't have enough understanding, so that gives you full comfort. But okay, now I'm gonna go in this thing because I get it. And I think that's always the thing that fascinates me. That I mean, in this conversation, there's a lot of things that I'm hearing for the first time. And mind you, I've been in a number of conversations about the history of our culture, especially in Ilobolo. And I've heard so many perspectives, and I think there's just so little, whether documented, whether it's a book one can pick up, whether it's history at school or varsity. It's always a very frustrating thing for me. And I'm not going to get into that whole systematic change, but I just think just the documenting of these things is so important, and having it become of what people do regularly.
Lutondo, I so much agree with you. And I think, culture is supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be experienced as a shield of protection. It should give you tools to stand before the world and say, come what may, I have tools, I can operate, I can face the storm. That's what culture supposed to do. But because of all these disruptions that have happened, one is the colonial one. You could allude some to religious and, for instance, economic exploitation, but also what we have become over generations, misquoting culture, using culture for slightly different reasons than what they were intended to. Culture actually becomes quite oppressive, and like you give a very good picture too, that it's not necessarily that you have an issue doing it, but you'd like to know why. Why do I have to sit here? I can wear this. I don't have a problem. I just like to know what it means, because my daughter is going to ask, why are you wearing that funny hat? And I can at least explain what it means, what it's called, and when you're supposed to wear it, whether I choose to do it again or not. And I think that's what I mean with cultural literacy. We live with a lot of diversity in terms of what we believe in, what we find to be true, what we think is important. So it's not so much about indoctrinating everyone to follow exactly the same thing, but at least I think all our children, like the children of Africa, let me just say it that way, should at least know what their culture mean, what certain dress codes mean, why you are not supposed to do certain things during certain times. Whether you believe in it or not, at least you know why it's done. And I think this is what the role of the elders used to be. They would sit, and we would sit as youngsters and just listen to them, and may not even participate particularly in the conversation, but pick up things as we were growing up. And then by the time we were young adults, we kind of knew what was expected from us. But now we can't even lean on many elders, because they have not been through the educational journey of learning.
There's another topic then that's creeping up, especially this comment by Bernard, and then there's another one by Gelato, where now they're talking about divorce in still within that African context. that how was divorce handled and was it there? But you've paid lobola, or maybe the families have paid lobola, and now the couple does not agree and there's a separation. Is there such thing as a refund of amalobol?
Right. So when we talk about divorce, and I know that many have kind of heard this sentence that divorce doesn't exist in African culture, which is not really true. But I think what it probably has meant is that the processes should be so perfect, let me say that there shouldn't be a need for divorce. That's the intention of the cultural process. And just before I get to that question, let me just say something about how the process is supposed to be done, in my understanding. So let's remember that this is one of many customs that are expected to be governed by ancestors and spirits. So there's ritual spaces that you need to go into, which of course could cause some conflict also, because now today we have many different belief systems. We may have disbanded certain ways of doing things, but that's how it was explained originally. And there's a focus on, when we, for instance, talk about Ilobolo and the bridewells, we often talk a lot about the cows, which are very significant. But this is also about gifts of land, spiritual items, labor agreements, items for household. There's a whole regiment of things that we used to show honor to the family that you are now going to be part of. So it's not just about, and I think we have kind of become very zoned in on that particular thing that we have begun to misunderstand. So I'm just trying to say that there's a broader template to it. The mother of the Makoti, the woman who's now going to get married, is the first one to know about Ilobolo. She's the one who's supposed to be informed first. In many cultures, the father only knows a little bit later. Then a delegation is supposed to be sent to the family of the bride, and to announce that there's somebody who is going to have an interest in your daughter. Can we set a date and a time for the negotiation? And then a date should be set, and then the delegations are going to meet. And what I find, I know that this can be experienced as oppressive in some families, but it's supposed, because you're like, why can't I speak? I don't agree with what my uncle is saying. He doesn't even know me. Like, he never raised me. How can he speak on my behalf?
This guy is just gonna make me lose this, fiance, or he's gonna get me burnt. Where now, what I budgeted for is double. I honestly, that principle, if you have history on it, I would love to know, because I think it's the most painful part,
right,
for most men when it comes to it. And I personally dislike that it's a negotiation. I think one of the beautiful things I learned about Sutu culture is that there is no negotiation technically. And for me, that was beautiful, because it speaks to the principles that I think you just started us on, and where it's about, we're trying to bring these two families together, and whatever we've set, we are trying to set to you the standard of how you're going to look after our daughter. And I think for me that was just beautiful. But the one of negotiation, I think that's where we start losing a lot of what it's supposed to be, because it becomes about the egos, and it becomes about, well, our son can show up with those cows that you're mentioning. And I think it devolves into the thing that I think a lot of our generation is just feeling, well, that's it, I don't need to do this. Why?
True. Let me say this. I love what you are saying, Lotando, because when, first of all, we touched on that certain things were scripted into law, and through that there was a misinterpretation already then. Even when we use the word negotiation and we use the word price, think about it. In our economic mind frame right now, when I buy something, I own it. So when you come and say, oh, that's a nice car, I want to drive it. No, you're not going to drive it. You're not going to do it. This is mine. I protect it, and Try to come for it, and you'll see what's going to happen. Like, I'm going to, you understand? It's my possession. I own it. I worked for it, and I feel like I must really defend it. And even when we think about, when are we in negotiations? We are in negotiations when we want to win. We want to get the best price. We want to outsmart you. I want to get a very expensive item for you for a very small price and laugh at you later how stupid you were to give me even this. So we need to be careful when we use these concepts that we normally use in very different circumstances, when this is actually a spiritual act of honor. So I agree with you that, and maybe that this is one part of Ilobolo we should really critically examine. Should we even negotiate at this time? Because I play a father role in certain young men's life. I'm not their biological father, but I have played an instrumental role in mentoring and guiding them on certain steps in life. And they are now sitting with a predicament where the negotiation outcome went so bad that they're sitting just feeling like they are absolutely useless because they cannot afford, they cannot even dream about, at least within the future that they can foresee, how they're going to get that money together. How can that be a good foundation for a marriage? And how is it that every time this young man tries to have a conversation with the family of the groom, he's told he's disrespectful, he must just man up. You see, in our days, we were real men. We wouldn't sit and cry like you do. If you really know what marriage is, you would, like, where does this even come from? So I think we need to really critically engage with when we use culture for the very wrong purposes. And I will say, even from my own experience, I've sat as part of delegations, and the conversation, you remember that culturally, the conversation is supposed to be a bit playful. So you will maybe say things like, when you are on the bride's team or delegation, you will say things like, for us to even start with you, we are very thirsty, so you need to give us something for our throat, for instance. You know, so that's supposed to be a playful thing. But now it has become, just like you say, it's full of ego in many instances. It's violent. I remember shouting. I remember, how can you say such a thing? Do you know what? I'm done with you. What? We came here in peace for a beautiful son, for a beautiful daughter, and so I think this is, I'm very disturbed that cultural, beautiful customs are being duped.
You just reminded me of a conversation I once had with a colleague, and especially around the issue of the conversations around Ilobolo being playful. So one of the things, there's a belief or a practice that unkosikazi akaqedwa or amalobola awaqedwa, right? And that stems from the conversation that when they say they are bringing inkomo, and they get to the prospective bride's family or the fiance's family, they would say, slete inkomo, and Naz, they say, family of the fiance would say, okay, well, but ngathi ziyashoda le inkomo zikuphi ezinye, bese laba bazothi, well, sithe masiziqhuba sisuka lapho sisuka khona, ezinye zike zaphambuka or ezinye zihluleke ukwela umfula, and it becomes this kind of jovial conversation that this one couldn't cross over the river, but because we had to get here, right? We couldn't wait for those cows to cross the river, so we decided to come with these ones. But we've sent some young men to go and look for those cows that couldn't cross the river. As soon as they find them, they will bring them.
You see.
And then comes the concept of every time when the groom comes to the wife's family, he would then say, hey, we managed to find one of the cows, and here is the cow. You see? We are still the boys are still looking for the other ones, but they are still coming. It was that kind of conversation. I don't think it was meant to be a negotiation more than a conversation. And the thing, I remember when I went to when my family went to my fiance, who's now my wife's family, her sister had to be hiding, and then she had to come, and then we were told that Melisi Mehlise Emtini. So apparently she was on a tree, that we couldn't see. And now we had to tell it to come down and bring it down. And we were joking that, how did she get up the tree if she can't come down? You know? And when we had finished the conversations, they said there's an aunt who when's an ubhemi sniff and ugwayi wakhe sowuphelile. So that meant, okay, now we had to buy her something. But buying her something is almost like, okay, 100 rand or 200 and just say, okay, na imali sniff or imali ugwayi, how they put it. So it's all that jovial conversation around it. And it's not meant to be hostile in my view.
And the intention is the groom's family getting to know the members of the family. Yeah. It's even when the young girls come to the elders that are at the gate, you know, and they are playing as though they're gonna open, but only they want money. And it's so that then the groom's family knows, oh, okay, they are grandkids, and this is more or less the age. So, and then I think this cuts across African tribes. We just have this notion of young boys and girls get nice things. They get sweets. They always get gifted things. They don't have to wait for their birthdays or for whatever. They just become. They just grow up in this love of being given things. And so, and also the dinner knocking, and are they being allowed in? They give, you know, the person at the gate something. But I think those things can still be done in a less violent or harmful way. I remember my one uncle being in a negotiation, and he said, the one at the gate, I'm going to give 5 rand. And everyone was shocked because it must be a note, you know, at least 50, you know. And he said, I'm going to give 5 rand. And all he did is he made sure they had 5 rand, but it was in 5 rand coins. So he just kept on. And then I thought it was very smart, because then the lady who had to open just got tired. I'm like, man, it's fine, get in. And so he turns to me and he says, you see, I've only spent 25 rand, whereas I could have given 100 rand and would have asked for more. Which for me, I took as a life lesson, as in, you know, sometimes frustrate the other side, you end up winning. So it was like the patience of negotiating. But I can say that the way that experience for me, I was allowed as an observer, as a young man, and it was part of what you were saying, like sitting around the elders and hearing them. It was like, we'll walk you and you'll just see how these things are done, because we won't always be here. So I think being part of that experience, it gave me a bit of comfort and warming up to the idea of, okay, you know, whether the person that I choose to marry one day, if I marry, is of African descent or not, I would want to go through this experience, because that for me was a beautiful experience. Just everything and the different things that I learned from on both sides. But then there were others where I was just like, what? How? Why? Is the point of this your guys' egos, or is it the point of this for the two people that love each other and would like to spend their life together? And I think for me, that's where I had a watershed moment, and I think that's where my conflict with the whole practice started.
And I think, yes. Sorry to shoot in, but I just see the question on the screen here as well. Is the union without lobola not blessed? And I think I wanted to tie that with the question about what in the case of divorce. And I think I want to start that conversation with, first we need to understand we have become very obsessed with the amounts. And I've overheard men talk about other men who allowed their daughters to be lobolad, which is a very problematic way to even say it, as if it's an action. But, you know, people say that today, she was lobolad. But for a small price in their eyes. And they then use that to kind of picture him as a weak man. He didn't stand up for his daughter and family. Now, when that becomes the conversation, who are we then? Because now we are literally selling women. And I think it's very important to understand that the blessing that this Kelatotswe is talking about is not in the price. It is in the honor that is being shown. Like you mentioned, Lutando, the many like you can't even call that negotiation. The many playful conversations conversations that binds the family together. You get to understand the temperatures of the family. You get to understand the family, who you are really marrying into, what is going to be expected from you. Now, these are beautiful things, but when they're done in an oppressive way, and the groom goes away, all he is stressed about now is how I'm going to get this money together. Then you cannot say that's a blessed marriage in the first place. So,
exactly.
And then to the question about what happens when a marriage is dissolved, I think, you know what, I don't think I can speak authoritatively on how everybody does this, because there's so many opinions about this. And remember that now there's also customary law, and I think under certain understandings of customary law, there is some form of claim that you can present in case of a marriage being dissolved. But from a cultural point of view, and this goes back to that the lobola, or I'm trying not to call it a price, but the wealth that is transferred is not supposed to be on such an overwhelming proportion that it completely depletes you. So, but when something is given, remember, this is something that is given in spirit. This is given under the watchful eye of ancestors. It's not supposed to be transferred back, because you already opened up this marriage and you introduced it to the ancestral world, to the spirits, to the whole family. You need to go back and announce something. And I know that some nations do this. They even have a ritual way of closing down a marriage if it doesn't go well. Because if you don't, the understanding is that you both walk away with open wounds, and you will attract further pain as you continue. So it needs to be closed also in under some observance of guidelines. But this is practiced very differently, and I've observed some conversations around this, and people don't agree. Some say, no, you can never return. Some say, no, you can, because it's dissolved and now it is no longer part of the pact. So I don't want to say exactly what is right in this. I think I want to go back to, and this is maybe how we need to understand how Ilobolo was, the role the context it played a role within, meaning that as an elder, you should be almost faultless in your understanding of what an elder means, or what being an elder means.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have ill intentions. You shouldn't be corrupt. You shouldn't have slept around, even in your own conduct. But now when we look at some of our families, there's gaps, there's brokenness. There's, like, I made a joke about it, but it's actually very sad that maybe as part of a delegation, you will see that, but these people don't even know me. Like, if they are asked what kind of characteristics I have, they're not even going to be able to say anything, because they were never there in my important journey of life. So we need to understand that there would be a much stronger social network that groomed everybody into the different roles they should play as a mother, as a father. And it's in that context we also need to understand that when we, for instance, talk about parents or aunties and uncles suggesting a partner for their son or daughter, because to many of us that sounds oppressive now, but it would be done in a context where even they would be monitored by a much bigger audience or family. So if they did things just out of spite or just because they wanted to cause some trouble, they would be taken aside. There will be somebody who sits them down and say that you cannot be like this to your child. This is not okay. You cannot even be in this delegation or a part of this ceremony, for instance. Now it's very much up to the individual. And we live, I mean, we know it. I'm not trying to mark us all with a negative taint, but I think we are aware that the African family is very much in trouble in many ways because of all the things that have happened to us over the last generations. And I think at least we need to look critically. And I think this conversation gives a picture to that. There are definitely parts of the of the Lobola process that we should safeguard and continue to practice as we have learned them. But there are certain things we need to look at practically. Let's also remember that African culture is dynamic. It hasn't been practiced exactly the same for 10,000 years. It has evolved. Certain things happen. A war happened. Peace happened. Conflicts were resolved. And certain things didn't have to be done the same way anymore. But who's going to guide us on that, on those solutions now? I think that's a question we really need to deal with.
Yeah. No, definitely agree. I think, yes. Go ahead.
Thanks. There's something important that I wanted to ask, or maybe kind of share. There's this thing that when you're a young man and you've never seen marriage being modeled, right? And there you are wanting to get married, but as soon as you get married, usually there would be somebody or a group of women or a delegation of women who advise or who guide the fiance. But I haven't known or seen of a delegation of men who counsel or guide or advise the young men, or the man or the groom who's now getting into this process. So could it be that there was never the concept of divorce or separation because the young men were guided by other men? And as you've also alluded earlier, that the young men were allowed to listen in and observe when elderly men did things and had conversations. So couldn't that have been kind of measures that allowed the young men to learn how to treat a woman or how to treat his wife, and how to be a man to his family?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that in. And I think I want to see it in the light of the understanding in indigenous African culture that not even, but manhood in itself is not seen as a process that you will just find out on your own. You are supposed to be guided. This is why some of us are asked to go to the mountain or go through some form of guided processes, because it can happen in different ways. Because it's understood that as a man you may have a very strong ego which leads you to make wrong decisions. You may not always know how to deal with anger or certain emotions, and you should be guided into that by men who have lived those experiences. And that's actually what used to happen. And in the marriage with my wife, so my wife is Motswana. I come from a background of the Caribbean, but also I've been initiated into Yoruba tradition, Ifa, in West Africa. So we wanted marriage processes that kind of spoke to that Pan-African symbiosis that we were building into our marriage. And fortunately, on my wife's side, especially her mother, is very understanding and very open-minded into learning more, even about things that she may not have been exposed to prior. And one of the things that were very important for us was that I, as the man who was going to be married, I needed to have a counsel around me that would guide me. I would sit with men who have been married for a number of years, to take me through processes, to drill me on how to face and meet certain circumstances. And I think even when we say that women are being advised into marriage, I know many get great advice, but to some extent, some women are also told horrible things by other women. They are being told that your husband is out for 3-4 days. Don't ask him questions. When he comes home, just cook a nice meal for him. Make sure that you wear certain things so that he has always an interest in you. If he dries up and you feel that he has interest outside the home, you should be the one that kind of lures him back into the home and entices him and things like that. And you can understand that that can easily, in the society we live now, be used in very oppressive ways and give the man kind of the right to really violate his wife. So I think we need to be honest enough to say that, yes, we are proud of African culture, but there's certain aspects of how it has been misinterpreted and how certain values have kind of sieved in and created disjointed and disturbing elements. And we need to get that out. I completely agree. We can't say because something has become slightly different or corrupted, then we should disband it. We should never do it altogether. Rather, we need to do the work it takes to bring it back and see what it should mean in 2021. Maybe it's slightly different from 300 years ago, for instance.
Yeah, definitely. You know what I'd like us to do? There've been kind of interesting questions along the way that I'd just like us to address. Maybe here's the first one. So Bernard here is saying that these days couples are allowed to go and sign even if they don't pay ilobolo, and the groom might be unemployed, but because two families have good relations, they allow the couple to go ahead. What are your thoughts around that?
I don't necessarily see a problem in the description that Bernard is sharing here. I think as was alluded to in this conversation a little bit earlier, Lobola is not just a point in time. If I was told very clearly that Lobola is something that I will pay for the rest of my life. And what that means is not that I'm in this huge debt, but it means that in my honor to my wife's family, I will always think of certain gifts or certain things that I can do, or even if I don't have money, maybe I can come and do some gardening, I can do some, and it's all about honoring the family and saying thank you for the wife that now plays a very, very important in my role. I'm very thankful for that. So for instance, in the write-up of Bernard, it could be that the family says, you can go ahead and get married, you have our blessings, and they call the families and those who are supposed to be present to do that. But I would advise, and that's my point, that I think there should always be ceremonies when we make big decisions, and getting married is a huge decision. And it is important that elders are present. It is important that even children are present in certain, or because it's a blessing. And I'll tell you this, from my own Mahadi process, what I remember the most were the looks at me from the elders. They were sitting like along these walls of houses, and they looked at me in a way that I almost felt like ground was built under my feet. I don't know how to explain it better, but it was like they didn't even say anything. They looked at me, they shook my hands, but they looked at me in a way that I just felt I was charged with some serious strength. And for me, that had a lot to do with that ceremonial surrounding. It was a moment. There were music, there were drumming, there was something that couldn't have been done just by having a quick meeting and say, okay, no, let's go ahead. So for me, the ceremonial space is very important, but of course, then it must be sacred. It must not be done with ill intent. It must not be confused with values that clearly do not belong in that space.
Yeah. So here's another one. How can we get families in future to understand that Lobola is not a price tag, and they should not use it to charge the groom's family based on what their daughter has. Like your academic background, they would often say, yeah, our daughter has done this, has done that, has been that, and
Does not
they
have
bring
children.
that,
You know what I mean?
and then they bring that into the discussion as if,
But I just want to jump in before we get the pulse. I think it goes back to what I said earlier about negotiation. This is another element of it for me, which subscribes to that whole thing, which I feel is just corrupting the process, and why there's then this feeling of either dissent or feeling of ownership. Like, I bought something now, it must deliver. And let's be frank, like, it's not always the nicest process for the groom to go through, because sometimes the whole idea of ilobola qed, or like, you don't finish paying the lobola because you must still honor that, in itself can be abused.
Absolutely.
Grooms don't look forward to seeing their wives.
True.
So for me, this that one for me, I think, is layered with, just from a principle perspective, I think it's already in the same bucket with the whole negotiation and price thing, where we just sort of losing the plot as to why we're here. We're here to unite the two families, and for the two people that love each other and want a future together, make sure that we, as the family, make that as seamless and usher them into that, but also protect them, as you mentioned in the beginning.
Exactly. No, thank you. I agree with everything you have said there. And I think what I would add to that, in relation to the question, how do we make sure, especially the next generation, do not further misunderstand and mispractice what is intended to be beautiful and affirming and powerful. I'm a firm believer of, I know it's called mentorship these days, but I would still like to call it initiation, because what initiation means, and I don't think you have to only picture going far away and being in a, because obviously we know that some of those places can also be very oppressive when they are conducted or misconducted. So removing many of our ceremonies away from the watchful eye of our elders and our families may not be the best thing to do right now, because we know that there are people who take advantage of that. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a role we need to play, those of us who are elders and who have lived longer. And sometimes it should be instituted, sometimes it should be part of a program, but sometimes it's also about what we need to do with young people in our lives. As an African man, sit down with young boys and just talk to them. What's going on in your life? Are you thinking about family? Do you see that there's a number of single parents out there? What do you think about that? What do you think is the right age? And my experience is there's a lot of young people who have never had these conversations with an older person. Never had the conversation. So young men literally believe that they just need to go and have sex with a woman now because to show the world that they are men. And you could criticize them and say, but this is nonsense. Yeah, but this is all they learned. Part of the problem is that we didn't play the role, or many of us were not there at the right time. So I'm just trying to say that both through programs, through projects, but also in our personal capacity, we need to want a better future, and that also means I need to do something with the little I have. It doesn't necessarily even take any money or resources, but just my time to sit. Do you know how much young people actually appreciate older people who take some time to listen to them? Not just come and say, you young people, you don't know anything, why do you sit there? But actually come and just ask them, how is life for you? What are you thinking about? What's going on? Young people want to talk to us, but many of us, we close down, and some of us don't even know to have the conversation. So I think, in a way, I'm saying this because I'm involved in many of these processes myself. I know that you are also involved in processes like this. And I just think it's so important that all of us on some level are involved in processes, whether it's be just within my family, on my street corner, or on a more program kind of basis. But we can actually change this. Let's not mark this as an impossible task that we need 50 million rand to be able to solve. We can actually do something about changing this, and it's up to you and me, really.
No, true. Conversations with friends.
You see it? We're doing it right now.
So let's do this then. Doc, can you then give us your closing thoughts around this topic, even though I feel it's a topic that we could just keep going on and on, because there's so much to break down, to teach, to get others to unlearn and relearn, you know. But for the purposes of rounding up this conversation, can you just give us your closing remarks or your closing thoughts around this topic, and basically where to from here?
Yeah. So let me, in my closing comment, and both say thank you for inviting me into this conversation and for having it. Let it continue and continue. We need to learn as we walk. But let me respond by sharing very, very briefly about something that I do. So because I do a lot of counseling, and because we use African culture as a depository for tools and for ways of managing our conflicts and finding solutions. So a number of young people come to me and say, I don't know how marriage was done in my culture, or my parents are within a particular religion where they don't really want it to be done the way that it was done traditionally. But we also feel we want to honor our parents, we want to respect them, but we also feel it's oppressive to our understanding of life if we just do what they expect us to do. Can you help us to find some form of merger? And then we sit down as a full family. We sit down with parents, we sit down with those who should be present, and I introduce some of the things that I can help them with. They may then add certain things that make sense to them. But the whole point is to kind of walk towards, let me call that a re-Africanization process, and which doesn't always look like the way it was 500 years ago. So what I do then is I walk a journey with the couple and the family where African culture is underlined and accentuated, but there might be certain elements that some people feel uncomfortable with. Then maybe we do that only with the couple in a more closed way. Other things, the parents and everybody's okay to be part of it, we do it together. And then if somebody wants for them to come in and read something from the religious book that they use, or say a prayer the way they are used to, there's no problem. But the issue, what I'm trying to say is that we need to walk ourselves back to us. And in the same breath, I'm saying, Ilobolo, we can critically engage with it. I don't want us to just throw it out, because as we throw it out, we even throw ourselves out. It is within Ilobolo, part of our identity also sits there. But I agree that in many instances, it is being disrespected and misused and done in ways that are not in accordance with how it was originally. So I'm just saying, as we go there, let's also walk there a little bit slowly, because remember, many of us have been away from our culture for generations. So it's a shock if you should now just jump into it. You don't understand half of what is done. That's not affirming. That's not blessings. That's actually oppressive. So I'm just saying, let's walk there slowly, and let's create, just like this conversation, lines, spaces for collaboration, spaces where ideas can be shared, spaces where the elders, the indigenous leaders, and the many young people who have questions can come together and learn.
Sando, your thoughts?
No, thanks, Doc. Thanks for our reunion was as good as our last meeting and our last conversation. I really love what you do. I think it's necessary. And I remember a conversation with Zabusa last year, just saying that, you know, if there are other people also doing this, is great. It's just validated how needed it is. And I think we do need different angles at the conversation that men need to have. We do need different angles, the conversation we need to have about our culture and our history. And I think it's always one of those sayings that circles about, you don't know where you come from, it's hard to determine where you're going to head or understand where you're heading. And I think it's what I was sort of highlighting earlier about, like, when you understand something, you're just able to go in it with the confidence that you want to. If you don't, it feels like abuse. It feels like forced on you. It feels, you know, there's just friction with it. And I think there are a lot of young people, I think that go through that. They do the Lobola thing because my family, your family, and then they go do the thing that they actually want, right? And whatever shape and form that takes, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the more that we can know about the culture and the cultural practice of Ilobola, I think the better off we can be in just how we embrace it. So I'm very grateful for the conversation you input this evening. I wanted to be spicy when I saw Vielo's comment about the gesture of the groom for the Makoti's family for raising the Makoti well. I was going to say, what then if the man feels that the Makoti wasn't raised well? Does he then borrow back, you know, the gesture to say, hey, we're empowering? Or vice versa, maybe the man wasn't raised well, so they feel like, hey, man, take some of this Lobola to empower. But I think the best thing that I took out of tonight is just the coming together of the two families, not just being there, but actually setting the platform and the protection for that couple to make sure they stay together and they live a happy life. Thanks.
Yeah, you know, and now the problem is it's going to start another topic, but I don't want it to. The idea of the bride or of the woman taking on the husband's surname and how all of that came about. And I think somebody once said that as Africans we never used to have surnames. So that starts a whole different topic, but we'll just but it's so we'll do that for tonight. But Doc, thank you so much for availing yourself and spending this hour with us. It feels like you've been part of our lives for so long. And
thank you. Likewise.
We will come not to go again, and you'll also oblige us and indulge us with your wisdom. As for friends, well, thank you for the comments. Vuyelo, welcome. Lerato, Bernard. I'm looking Celius or Michelle. I'm looking for that other one. This one gets me on the tongue. Okay,
Good.
cool. Yes. So thank you for joining us tonight. There's a culprit who just wants to take a peek here. You know, he's out of order. Okay, thank you. Lusando, you can close us off.
You did done so well. Thanks, colleagues. Thanks, friends. Thanks for everyone that tuned in and that will tune in after the fact. It was conversations with friends, conversations for men by men with men. So let's continue going in the chat and look forward to seeing you next week. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Nambon.
Okay.
Hello, champ.
Fana.
Good night.